Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to your channel, The Anatomy Canvas, with your tutor, Dr. Shehla Aman. Today we are going to discuss with the formation of the cardiac septas. So, cardiac septas, major septa of the heart are formed from the day 27 to 37th day of development, when the size of embryo is from 5 millimeter and it grows up to 16 to 17 millimeters. There are different methods by which cardiac septas develop, and one of the method is that the two actively growing masses of the tissue approach each other and they fuses in the midline and they divide the area, they divide the cavity into two separate cavities. Another way is that the actively growing tissue from one side of the endocardium and it reaches to the opposite sides and it divides the tissue into two different parts. So one of the method is that the developing of the these two septa. This is usually formation of the endocardial cushions which contribute to the formation of the septum formation in the atrium, septum formation in the ventricles. Both in these both cases, their membranous parts are formed by these methods. In addition to this, they also contribute to the formation of the valves of the pulmonary and aortic and also the conotruncal regions. But the difference in aortic and pulmonary areas, the localized mesenchyme present in endocardial tissue will form the endocardial cushions, but in cases of the conotruncal region, the endocardial cushion is formed by the cells which are migrating from the neural crest cells, and they form the endocardial cushion in the in the conotruncal region. So such a septum formed may also be formed by the active growth of the single tissue. ठीक है, so formation of such tissue masses depend upon the two factors. First, there is either synthesis and deposition of the extracellular matrix. Second, there is the cell proliferation and migration from the endocardium into the these actively growing areas. So in these actively growing areas, the endocardial newly synthesized and formed and proliferating cells are covered by the extracellular matrix and they protrude into the cavities. So they contribute to the AV cushions and the conotruncal region and membranous part of atria and ventricular septums. Formation of the septum in these locations, they, as I already told you, form the membranous portion of the AV canals and aortic and pulmonary channels. Another way may be that the narrow strip of the tissue in the wall of the atrium or ventricles fails to grow. So in such a case, a narrow strip usually fails to grow and the cavity on each side continuously expands, which results in the formation of the ridge which is present in the center, and it forms an incomplete septa in between two rapidly growing cavities or rapidly growing portions. So when growth of expanding portion continues on either side of the narrow portion, two walls approach each other and eventually form the septum. So such a septum never completely divides the lumen, but it leaves a narrow communication between the expanded cavities, and such a septum partially divides atria and ventricles. So now the detailed septum formation first in the atria. In this diagram you can appreciate that this is the common atrium and this area shows the absorbed part of the sinus venosus into the common atrium, which is now the right atrium, and this part is called the sinus venereum, and this is the right valve of the sinus venereum and the left valve of the sinus venereum. And because of the incorporation of the sinus venosus into the right atrium, a narrow ridge of tissue is formed which is called the septum spurium. At the same time, when the sinus venosus is incorporated, a narrow strip of the tissue originates from the roof of the common atrial cavity, and this is the septum primum, and this septum grows towards the newly deforming the endocardial cushions. So when this septum grows downwards near the area of the endocardial cushion, it shows a small opening in between the septum primum and the endocardial cushion, and this opening is called the ostium primum. When the endocardial cushions grow on each side of the septum primum, they closes the ostium primum. But before the closure is complete, the cell death occur in upper part of the ostium primum and forming the ostium secundum over here. At the same time, when sinus venosus is incorporated and a right atrium is growing inside, the left valve of the sinus venosus and septum spurium, they fuses with the septum secundum, and they will form the septum secundum, which will now grow downward over here. So in this diagram, you can see this is the septum primum. These are the endocardial cushions which are forming over here in AV valve in the region of the atrioventricular canals, and this is the ostium primum. In this diagram, you can also appreciate that the opening is present. This is the ostium primum. Also the septum primum. Here you can see another thing. This area is the dorsal mesocardium, from which the heart is suspended posteriorly from the in the cavity, in the pericardial cavity, and mesenchymal cells present in the dorsal mesocardium also populate this area, and they form the dorsal mesenchymal protrusion, and in this area the pulmonary veins develop. As the dorsal mesenchymal protrusion grow and it is incorporated into the left atrium, the pulmonary vein is also incorporated up to the point of the branching of the pulmonary vein. So as a result, the four separate openings, you can see four separate openings of the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. So you can see the right atrium, the left atrium, this is the septum primum which is forming. This is the dorsal mesenchymal protrusion which contribute to the end part of the interatrial septum, and it meets the endocardial cushions over here, and this is the smooth walled part of the left atrium, and here is the smooth walled part of the right atrium. This is called sinus venereum, and this part is formed by the pulmonary veins. So here you can also see this is the septum primum which is developing, and this is the dorsal mesenchymal protrusion which is forming. These are the endocardial cushion. This is the smooth walled parts, the left sinus valve, the right sinus valve, and the sinoatrial orifice. In this diagram, you can appreciate that the septum primum has completely fused with the endocardial cushions, and ostium primum has been closed, but before the closure is complete, cell death has produced another opening which is a slit like oblique opening in upper part of the septum primum. This is the ostium secundum, and at the same time another curtain like growth occurs and it grows downward. This is the septum secundum which never completely divide the atrial cavities, but it leads to an opening in between the two atria and oblique passage which is called the foramen ovale. This blue color area is the sinus venereum, and with further development of the septum secundum, the left sinus valve and septum spurium both fuses with the septum secundum over here, and in this way interatrial septum is formed with an oblique opening which was initially called as ostium secundum, and now it is called the foramen ovale. In adult heart it is shown by the fossa ovalis. Septum formation in AV valve, how does it occurs? That the different swellings appear in endocardial cushion. These are the superior and inferior endocardial cushions, and these are the lateral endocardial cushions. When superior and inferior endocardial cushions grow and they approaches each other, they divide the atrioventricular canal into two separate atrioventricular canal. The right atrioventricular connecting the right atrium to the right ventricle, and the left atrioventricular canal connecting the left atrium to the left ventricle. So this diagram show the looped heart anatomy and different parts which are formed from the different parts of the heart tube. This is the area which is developing into the aortic sac. This is the area forming the conotruncal region, the left atrium, and the right atrium. And in this diagram you can see aortic sac, the conotruncal region, the left atrium, and the right atrium which is forming. Also you can see this is the right atrium, this is the left atrium part forming, and the atrioventricular canal. Another important point which you can see over here, that initially this AV canal connects the common atrial cavity to the left atrium, and it is not connected to the right atrium and is prevented by the bulboventricular sulcus or bulboventricular flange which is present over here. Later on, this bulboventricular flange disappears over here, and also with the change in position of the AV canal, this opening shifts towards here, and then the common atrium is connected to the both sides of the ventricles. In this diagram you can also appreciate that initially this opening is present over here, and it is restricted to connect to the left atrium by the bulboventricular flange, but because of the shift in position and because of the changing in the bulboventricular area, this opening, this AV canal connected to the both side of the ventriculars. It connects both side of ventriculars to the atria. So this is the right and the left AV canals, and this area is the sinoatrial valve guarding the sinus venereum, and this was the initial, the foramen ovale. So partitioning the AV canal, the expansion of tissue around periphery of the AV canal, dorsal and ventral cushions fuse to form right and left AV canals divided by septum intermedium. Remodeling brings the right and the left canals into alignment with the future right and left ventricles, and with further development which occurs in this area, and with the flow of the blood in the ventricular, the valves which are formed by the endocardial cushions, now the pectinate ligament and the musculi tendini also formed over here. So these are the two links for the animated videos for the heart development. In this diagram, you can also see initially this is a sickle shaped groove of the septum primum, and this is the endocardial cushion, and this area is the ostium primum. In this diagram you can see the ostium septum primum has fused with the endocardial cushion, and ostium primum has been closed, but at the same time the cell death has occurred and smaller cavities are present in upper part of the ostium septum primum. When these coalesce, they form the ostium secundum. At the same time you can also appreciate the growth of the septum secundum in each. In this diagram you can see the septum secundum has completely developed, and it is connecting the right side of the atria to the left atria by an oblique opening. This is the septum secundum, now called the foramen ovale. This foramen ovale completely closes at birth because of the changes in the pressure and also because of the changes in the blood flow, so that when pressure changes occur in the left atrium, the left side of the septum primum are pressed against the septum secundum, thus closing the oval foramen. In 20% of the cases there is a propatency, but it usually do not affect the neonate. Later in the life, in early few weeks, a complete closure occur because of the fibrosis of the foramen ovale, and there is then no connection between the two atria after birth. These are the references for the today's lecture, that is the Langland's Medical Embryology and the Grace Anatomy. And here we complete our today's lecture, and I thank you all for your attention, dear students. We will meet inshallah in the next class about the anomalies of the atrial septum, that is the atrial septal defects and ventricular septal defects. Till then, Allah Hafiz.